I was deeply uncomfortable. I did not know about the realities that Palestinians lived under. I was systematically denied an education about that reality. And to this day, we see pro-Israel organizations working to do everything they can to change the topic away from Palestinian suffering onto Jewish discomfort. You know what? Occupation and apartheid are deeply uncomfortable. We should all be uncomfortable and outraged by what's happening in Gaza right now. I thought I knew Israel, but the way that the apartheid system is actually built is such that Israeli Jews don't actually have to see the reality that Palestinians live under. They can drive on roads, they can drive on the side of the wall where they don't have to see what is on the other side, the daily horrors and brutality and deep denial of dignity and freedom that Palestinians live under. And once I saw those realities with my own eyes, once I met people who had been evicted from their homes, who were denied basic freedom of movement, people just like me who want to live in freedom and safety, whose every piece of their lives have been destroyed and constricted by a system of Jewish supremacy, I couldn't unsee those things. I've been part of this generation that includes, If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace and many other groups that are taking on an outdated establishment that wants to enforce a pro-Israel orthodoxy and will do everything they can to attack and marginalize and silence anybody who dissents from that viewpoint. You mentioned at the beginning of this segment the lawsuit going on at Harvard University. I can't help but bring up right now the attacks that we've seen over the weekend on Derek Penzler, the director of a Jewish Studies Center at Harvard University, a world-renowned Jewish studies scholar, and he has been attacked for being named to an anti-Semitism task force at Harvard just because he criticizes the Israeli government. So we're seeing how far this establishment is willing to go to attack and marginalize anybody who doesn't toe that very strict and narrow orthodoxy, and increasingly anybody who doesn't defend this government's genocidal assault on the Gaza Strip. And it's absurd, but it's also deeply dangerous and offensive to those of us who are acting out of a deep place of intellectual integrity, of Jewish values, of a commitment to justice, who want to build a world of genuine safety and freedom and dignity for Jewish people and for Palestinians. And that old guard is more and more desperate to keep any of us out of public life and political life, and certainly not to be legitimized as a legitimate Jewish voice.
Nearly 4 in every 10 younger Jewish Americans think Israel is committing genocide.
It's not surprising to me, but it is incredibly encouraging and important to me that more people know these numbers, especially as President Biden and Democratic officials continue to cite American Jews and the notion of Jewish safety as the reason that they're supporting Israel's continued offensive in Gaza. And it's just clear that that's not what significant numbers of people in our community want. And it's so offensive.
Because you mentioned Joe Biden then. He said no Jew in the world would be safe without Israel. So do you think, is this kind of example of non-Jewish, very pro-Israeli figures who will talk about Jewish opinion and what's best for the interests of Jewish people in a way that actually doesn't interact with the sorts of findings I've just read out there?
Yeah, the first thing that is always important to say about this is American Jews, President Biden should be keeping Jews safe in America because he's the president of right? Because we are Americans. That's why we should be safe here. Not because we have a nation state overseas that is massacring another people in the name of our safety. I'm part of a generation of young people who, as we've seen, these repeated assaults on the Gaza Strip in the last decade, certainly right now is a watershed moment, just horrors beyond what even those of us, who've been following this issues for years could have even imagined. It's such a breaking moment. And I think we're seeing just so many Jewish young people who are outraged that there are these institutions who speak on our behalf and are being used as cover for, positions that we just find so egregiously offensive and sickening. There's this argument that I've found quite offensive, but it is interesting to break this down. There are certain AIPAC spokespeople who are trying to play down the influence of their funding and saying, sure, this was the most expensive primary race in history, but, Jamal Bowman was going to lose anyways. First of all, I don't think we should if you thought he was going to lose anyways, you didn't need to sink $20 million into this race, right? So it's so insulting to, Democratic voters and to the masses of young people and just people in the district who had to vote, who had to try to out organize this onslaught of funding from AIPAC. So I think the first thing I actually want to say is this is so deeply anti-democratic. It is such a threat to the integrity of our electoral system that we have special interest groups who can just pour millions of dollars.
The Anti-Defamation League in the United States has been deemed by Wikipedia to be an unreliable source.
It's actually kind of hopeful to me that there is accountability for some of the misinformation that the ADL has been putting out there. A lot of their researchers on white nationalism and anti-Semitism actually believe that the way the organization repeatedly conflates pro-Palestinian sentiment with anti-Semitism undermines the integrity of their data. That's what this whole Wikipedia thing is about. They put out statistics a couple months ago about anti-Semitic incidents in the US, and it turned out that over a quarter of those incidents were Jewish-led marches for a ceasefire. I mean, it's actually so both insulting, first of all, that we have a very powerful Jewish organization in America who is regularly calling Jews anti-Semitic. And more than that, it actually endangers us because it means that it's even harder to make people care about anti-Semitism and to believe that it's a thing when anti-Semitism is repeatedly used as the guise for quashing pro-Palestinian movements and activism. It's actually Palestinian Americans who have experienced the most lethal and direct violent attacks since October 7th, right? We saw a 6-year-old Palestinian boy stabbed to death in Chicago. We saw 3 Palestinian college students shot in Vermont. Just this past week, a white woman in Texas tried to drown 2 Palestinian kids in a pool in Texas. I mean, and then yesterday in Congress, we had 62 Democrats vote on a bill that would prohibit the State Department from citing the Gaza Health Ministry statistics. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib called that genocide denial, right? So the level of anti-Palestinian racism, the idea that the US government can't even cite the numbers of Palestinians that are being killed in Gaza. And we have so little coverage in our media about the very direct, very lethal violence that is targeting Palestinian communities across this country. I just find so deeply upsetting and terrifying.
I have friends who just are I was conveniently looking away from what is happening before now. And I just can't, they're having to do a lot of quick education right now about understanding what was going on the ground. How is it that, you have a society in Israel that lives next door on top of, next door to millions of people who are denied basic freedom and dignity and live under such extreme oppression. You have a lot of people who are this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I believe in and can stand for. And I see so many people who are having those really painful, intimate conversations in their own families, and with loved ones who are, coming to protest for the first time in their lives, who are, reading books and uncovering the history that's been shielded from us our entire lives. And it's a real moment of transformation for a lot of people.
Do you feel like there's a generational shift happening in the US right now?
I just think it's undeniable that the experience of being a young person who on social media right now, you almost have to work quite hard to not know what's going on in Gaza right now, because the genocide is being live streamed onto our phones. I mean, we are seeing young people who look like us, have the same, hopes and aspirations as we do, who want to just live a normal life, to be safe and free.